On today's episode, we show off the new heated Corbeau seats. So my son saw these Corbeau seats in a prototype Wrangler that Jeep made for a car show or something, and he really liked them. He wanted better support laterally and especially around the shoulders, and the fact that the Jeep headrests stick into the back of your head at a 45-degree angle and they're not adjustable, they just suck. And these are heated. So he went ahead and purchased them, knowing they'd fit, obviously with some modification. And so that's what we did. The first thing I did was I took the factory seats off the mounts and the adjusting rails. So I left the mounts in the Jeep, and my first mistake was making a plate to bolt the seat with the mounts loose in the Jeep. And it turned out great until I went to put it in and I tightened up the mounts, and then everything moved and the studs didn't line up where my holes were. So we threw that one away. So with the seat brackets mounted and tight, I used 1/8 inch by 2 inch wide flat stock, and I basically made a square, welded it up, transferred the stud pattern of the adjusters to each one, and I didn't make one and then just make a duplicate. I knew they weren't going to line up. There's too much adjustment on the holes of these brackets, so each one is individual to each seat. And the passenger seat has 6 studs on the adjusting rail, and the driver's seat has 8 studs, so that's another difference. So after I made the plate, drilled the holes for the studs, I slid that down on here. I measured the dimension of the 4 bolt holes on the bottom of the Corbeau seats, and I transferred that on as well. And then I went ahead and mocked it up. So the plate goes on the rails, and you use the nuts to bolt the plate down to the rails. Then the seat goes on, and you can get to the 4 holes from the front by moving it up, and the back by moving it back, and I bolted the seat down. So the first thing I noticed was when I went to pull the lever up, it hit the bottom of the seat, and I couldn't disengage to get the travel. So I used some spacers. They're really thick, heavy chrome-plated steel spacers. I don't know where I got them, but they weren't tall enough. And when I went to Ace, they actually had the exact same spacers in all different sizes. So I was able to get a little bit taller ones. I mounted them between the seat and the plate. Now the handle moves up, and you have full travel. So after we figured that out, I needed to keep the same seatbelt system, shoulder harness, buckles, and everything that the Jeep had, so the airbags will work, so the dash lights don't stay on all the time. The passenger side seat base has a flat, full-length stamped steel plate brackets, part of the pan, and the driver's seat has 4 individual hinged ones because it has that ratcheting mechanism that you can raise and lower the seat. So I cut all 4 of those individual hinges off, and I cut them down, made them pretty, modified them so that I used the driver's side bracket for the seatbelt buckle in its exact same place on the driver's side seat for the seatbelt buckle. The driver's side bracket that holds the shoulder harness is identical, only it's a mirror image. So I used it over here for the passenger side seatbelt buckle. So now I can use the same bolts, the threads are in there, it fits. It's already got the bolt hole pattern for the studs, so I didn't even have to drill anything. So the front 2 brackets I didn't use. I was trying to figure out a way to make those for the shoulder harness mounts, and it just wasn't working. So what I did is I went to the passenger side seat pan, and the threaded areas here that held the belts for the passenger side, I just cut those out of the pan. I mean, it's still 1/8 inch thick steel, and I trimmed them down and they, again, have the holes already there for the studs, and I flipped them upside down and put them on. If I had it right side up, it was too much in the way of all this mechanism. And if you've seen the Jeep before in other videos, there used to be mag light holders here on both sides that I had, which were pretty handy. But with this being flipped down and you move the seat forward, it hits. So we just lost the mag light holders and everything's good. So I just blew everything back apart, cleaned it up, painted everything, and I pulled the pressure sensor out of the passenger side seat for the airbag, so that when you start it, it says passenger airbag off, and then when somebody sits in there, it goes out, and then if you get into a wreck, the airbag will deploy. I wanted to get it directly underneath the vinyl seat cover and the foam, but the heater's there. I don't know how that would work, and I didn't want to disassemble this complete brand new seat. It's all hog ringed underneath, both sides, front and the back. I slid it underneath the springs on the bottom of the foam. I don't know if that's going to be enough to sense pressure, especially if you get somebody in here that doesn't weigh anything, but we'll find out. If you're familiar with the passenger side seatbelt on a Wrangler, there's this big long metal cylinder. That's a seatbelt pretensioner. So like milliseconds before the airbag deploys, it sends a signal. It cinches up the shoulder harnesses before the airbags deploy. So I kept that. This is on. Nothing moves. I red Loctited the bolts. I'm able to plug everything back in, and everything should work. The seats were fairly affordable. They were, I think, $1,400 with the heaters, and all that's pre-installed. What I'm working on now are the switches. So this is the center console, and my son wanted a place for the switches that he doesn't have a passenger asking him to turn the seat heater on and off or turn it on high and low. The only real place that I could find was between the cup holder and the shifter. They're fairly small switches. Down is low, up is high, middle is off. They got LED lights in there that let you know when they're on. But on the back side, there was a mount like these where the little white clips go. So I cut that out, which isn't a big deal. But on the main console, where that cover goes over, you have an area where that used to slip in and clip. So I got to trim that out with a Dremel. The seats came with all the wiring and harnesses. So the heaters are pre-installed, and there's a plug hanging out the bottom underneath the springs. And it's a real long wire because they don't know where you're going to put the seats. So I cut a slit in the carpet underneath the seats on both sides. I coiled up the excess, slid it all underneath the carpet, poked the plug through, plugged it into the seats, and then I ran the rest of it out of the carpet under the console. So the plugs sit here next to each side of the shifter. And then you have this. One end plugs into the switch, and one end plugs into the rest of the harness that goes to the seat heater. So what I'm going to do here is there's threaded studs that are welded to the floorboard. It's a perfect ground. They're all over underneath the console. I'm going to cut these short. I'll probably just wire both of them together to one eyelet and put it under there, and then I'll be done with this. The red wire, I'm going to run out to the firewall. So if you've seen the other videos, we got a gauge pod on the top of the dash where the cubby is, and I have all those wires ran out because I have to run sensors to it, and I ran the power wires out there. I'm going to hook them up to the inside the fuse box. So I'm going to do the same with this. It's already got its own fusible link, and I'll just run those through the same conduit the gauge wires go to. So I will be able to get the console in, plug everything in, the ground will be done, and then I'll just have the red wires hanging out the back. And I can't really test anything because everything's blown apart and I got no engine harness yet hooked up or a battery. So, but I don't expect there to be any problems. It's 2 wires. So it's pretty cool. If you're interested in something like that, go to Corbeau, check them out.